Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about the difference between the cognitive load theory and the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. First, we'll talk about the cognitive load theory. The cognitive load theory essentially discusses how we store and retain information through the working memory and long-term memory. This theory focuses on secondary information, which is information that we need to learn from somebody else. And there are several characteristics or principles that Pass and Sweller, in their 2014 textbook, used to discuss how we process and store information presented to us, which is basically information that we cannot learn on our own, and it's also called secondary information. So first, the information store principle refers to the idea that storing something in long-term memory means we have learned that concept or skill. Since humans have a very large storage capacity in long-term memory, the goal of teaching should be to present secondary information in a way that students retain that information in their long-term memory. The second principle is the borrowing and reorganizing principle. This principle suggests that we learn new things through imitating someone else or through reading something that somebody has written. In other words, we are getting the information from someone else and are processing that information with what we already know, and then can reorganize the information and store it in our long-term memory. The third principle is the randomness as genesis principle, and it is a form of problem solving. Students must engage in activities through a series of trial and error actions to determine the effectiveness of their actions. This occurs when there is nobody there to help guide them through the proper steps. But I also believe this is important because if we have someone to walk us through the steps every time, we are less likely to actually learn and commit the steps to long-term memory than we are if we do those steps ourselves. Fourth, the narrow limits of change principle follows the idea that working memory is more efficient to use as it is pretty limited in capacity, and therefore humans can work through the working memory faster than they can in the long-term memory. Working memory essentially is used to determine what new information should be stored in our long-term memory. But it is easier to process information through working memory first, as it has a limited capacity and duration of storage, so the individual is not overwhelmed with new information and trying to process it with the old information. Fifth, the environmental organizing and linking principle helps us use the information in our long-term memory and to then apply the appropriate action to the situation at hand. The cognitive load theory also discusses three types of cognitive load. The first is intrinsic. Intrinsic cognitive load refers to the complexity due to the nature of the task and the information that needs to be processed in the mind. The second is extraneous. Extraneous is cognitive load that is due to inappropriate instructional practices, so things that the teacher may do or present to the students. And this will cause more cognitive load for the learner to process all at one time. So not only are they dealing with intrinsic cognitive load, now they're also dealing with extrinsic cognitive load, and it makes it harder to learn. The third type of cognitive load is called germane cognitive load. This is what is considered effective cognitive load. The working memory can attend to the intrinsic load without the extraneous load causing extra load on the learner. The second theory I'm going to discuss today is the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. According to Mayer in 2014, this theory follows three basic assumptions. First, humans process information through two different channels, visual and auditory. And depending on how the information is first presented, individuals will process the information through their visual center if they're given pictures or videos first, and the auditory center if they're presented with words through narration or sounds, things like that. Our representation mode processes whether the information is presented to us verbally or non-verbally, while the sensory modality approach focuses on whether the information is presented visually or through auditory means. The second assumption, according to Mayer, is the limited capacity assumption, which is similar to the working memory in the cognitive load theory. In the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, The idea is that we are limited in the amount of information we can process in one channel at a time. For example, when I'm trying to learn something new, like the content in a class that I might be taking, for example, I cannot have competing auditory and visual stimuli going on at the same time. For me, I need complete quiet, no distractions in order for me to be able to process the information that I need to process. Otherwise, I am presented with too many stimuli and I'm not able to process what I need to. In some cases, even when the environment is completely quiet, I will need to read and reread the information in order to fully comprehend it. My memory store is not one that's photographic. I don't memorize the information the first time I read it. As learners, we have to be able to distinguish what is relevant information that needs to be focused on and how to connect that information to previous knowledge. Finally, the third assumption is that we follow 3 different processes when we actively process information. This is what is known as the active processing assumption, meaning we select, organize, and then integrate the information in our minds, transferring the relevant information from the sensory stimuli through the working memory and into the long-term memory store. In order for this to happen, though, Mayer mentions that the information we as teachers present needs to have some sort of structure, meaning we need to be organized in how we present the information and not just throw out a bunch of random facts to our students. And we also need to guide our students on how to structure the information we provide them. The memory storage system in the cognitive theory of multimedia learning starts with the sensory memory, which is one that does have unlimited storage capacity, but lasts very briefly. This is where pictures or words are processed. We also have a working memory, which has a limited capacity and information is stored there for a short period of time. And we also have long-term memory, which has an unlimited capacity, but the information is going to be stored there for a longer duration of time.